All right, here we go. All right, we're ready.
All righty. Well, tonight we're going to start on slide 278, Uniform Hebrew Calendar. In my mind, last week's class was a fiasco, and I told Glenn he could delete it entirely if he wanted. Our first slide last week started out saying about the Uniform Hebrew Calendar, and I expected the following slides to be about that, and instead it went into some very detailed, advanced student stuff on the regular perpetual Hebrew calendar. In my mind, I thought that was all necessary for you to understand this one, but it wasn't. And maybe another time I would divide the class into the beginning and the advanced, but there's actually not very much advanced stuff in this course. So the good news for you is we're skipping the rest of that. And I will be more aware now as we go on to be able to skip more slides. And especially when we get to the star stuff, we can skip a lot, I believe. That I tend to try to cram too much down people's throats. So with all that in mind, today we really do start on the Uniform Hebrew calendar. So as we pointed out last week, there's a uniform version of all of the calendars that track something in the sky, like the Hebrew does the sun and moon, and the Venus and Mercury and Mars. All of those have uniform versions. And the uniform version does not ever track the actual planet or objects. So the Uniform Hebrew does not track the sun nor the moon. When it's to do things, it's to have holy days at times of year when you couldn't have them. If you need a Passover kind of event, and it's not in the spring, like when the real Passover is, then you can have Passover on the Uniform Hebrew calendar and have it in the wintertime, wherever it's needed. With the other calendars, especially the Enoch calendar, it has one pattern for every year. So the uniform calendar just has 364 days, which always repeats in the 4 quarters, and we've been through the Enoch calendar plenty. The Hebrew calendar, the regular one, as you know from what we've already talked about, it has exactly 6 different year lengths. 3 that are around 350 days, which is 12 moon phases, 12 new moon cycles, and 1 that's 30 days longer, that's about 380 days, 85 days, which is 13 when they enter the extra month. I was shocked to find out there is a thing called a Uniform Hebrew calendar, and it has a wheel that looks very similar to you've seen a wheel like this even last week for the regular perpetual Hebrew calendar. It has 33 years in it. They're listed in lengths around the outside of the wheel, and on the day they start, both the Hebrew and Uniform Hebrew calendar can only start on a Sunday, Saturday, Thursday, or Tuesday, 4 days of the week in the usually March timeframe when it starts, somewhere between March 7th and 20, well, up to almost April 6th. For a whole month there it can start. Anyway, this calendar just goes round and round. There's no reason to intercalate, to jump around. Last week we got confused about jumping. The other calendar doesn't even count straight around. It has to jump around to actually follow the sun and moon. This one, it just goes around this wheel forever, repeating exactly every 33 years. And it is tied to the Enoch calendar. We'll talk about that, but let's go to the next slide, 279. This is an example of it. the total number of days in the 33-year cycle just happens, well, it doesn't just happen, it does equal exactly 33 uniform Enoch years. In other words, the number of days is 33 times 364. So the uniform Hebrew and Enoch realign every 33 years. And an example of such a realignment is that it was 33 years on both from presenting Jesus at the temple, which we've seen this slide before, this picture, until the resurrection. They both were basically, well, it says right here what they were. They were both one spring, which is New Year on the uniform Enoch, and they were both Easter Sunday on the uniform Hebrew. So, but you see, Easter is not always on one spring, just at least once in 33 years it is. But the variation that is in that wheel is really fun, because the Lord loves variety. That just keeps showing up over and over. He has some things that are very simple and boring, like the 7-day week, where it's always exactly the same. And that, what you give up for boring is stability of, you can count the days and you never insert an extra one. But then, as much as he can, he puts in variation. And the uniform Hebrew is a good example of a lot of variation in just 33 years.
The announcement of the Temple Fund was in December, and it was trumpets on the Universal Hebrew back in 2016.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that shows up on these calendars that is pretty convincing the Lord's still using them. Let's go to slide 280. This is really, I believe, the first slide I've had on the Savior going to the spirit world after death, speaking in the spirit prison. I was really glad to find such a great picture, because I'm not sure that's how it was, but I'm not sure it wasn't how it was. I mean, my understanding is at that time the spirit prison was in fact underground. But of course they're in spirit, so it's not quite the same as people in a big cave. But here is one of the things that I was spending all the time last week kind of preparing for, and it's not that difficult. This one says that the perpetual Hebrew aligns with the solar year by not allowing Passover to precede the equinox, and we emphasized that last week. The uniform Hebrew does likewise with the uniform Enoch equinox. In other words, even though the uniform equinox goes all around throughout the year, it might be in the winter, it could be in the summer, whenever, the uniform Hebrew calendar goes around with it. They're lock-synced together in such a way that even though the uniform Hebrew has variation, the variation is such that Passover is always on or after the spring equinox. At the death of Christ on Saturday, 2nd of April, AD 33, when he goes to the spirit world, that was an example of Passover being the earliest it can be on the uniform Hebrew, because it was right on the spring equinox. So it was just amazing to me, and it continues to be, how these sacred calendars are interlocked, even the uniform versions. And when I got to the uniform star calendar, it's also locked in to the Enoch calendar, even the uniform version. Okay, let's go to slide 281. This one we can almost skip. Again, it's kind of technical. I'll say it quickly. But during the whole ministry of Christ, the perpetual Hebrew and the uniform Hebrew were synchronized. And this is more like me being amazed, because the wheels are actually very different. And so I actually drew this picture out of how they were synchronized. This one has what's called a purple Tuesday, that's 354 on the year of the baptism. And the other calendar is down here on a red Tuesday. The color doesn't matter so much. It's a Tuesday year with 254. And as this one, as they both march around their years clockwise, they both, if you look, just happen to have the same years in the same order. And that just kind of amazed me. So this is mostly to show the Lord's hand is in this planning all over the place. Okay, let's go to slide 282. All righty. New Year's Day. Now, so what we're going to be looking at now is just some usages of, well, not only the uniform Hebrew calendar, but maybe this one is mostly just regular Enoch calendar. New Year's Day on the uniform Enoch cycles through all the seasons in 293 years. Yes, it takes that long to go through all the seasons, to realign with the Enoch calendar new year. So they're usually not in sync. And the two were aligned when Israel passed over the River Jordan into the Promised Land. If you read Joshua, I think it's chapter 4, about when they passed over, the word Passover is there, I think it's 10 times in the chapter. They came to where they were going to pass over the river, and then they passed over the river, and they looked back and said, gee, we just passed over the river. You know, and you say, does this have something to do with Passover? And yes is the answer. On both of these calendars, it was Passover. What's funny is it was not Passover on the regular Hebrew calendar. It was the day of consecration, which is the day to be recommitted and circumcised. And they were all circumcised together, the men after coming out of Egypt and the wilderness. Apparently they were not circumcised as they went along, but this was a kind of big circumcision day. Okay, next slide, 283. And here's another one that shows the two calendars. Again, they only line up every 293 years. But in Deuteronomy, which was given just before they passed over the Jordan into the Promised Land, this is at the very end of the time in the wilderness, the two were also aligned on 14 winter. They were aligned, and I guess I'm just enamored with giving you some examples of, they aligned 8 of the 293 years alignment cycles earlier at the birth of Adam's grandson on the same day, 14 winter. I have no idea what that means, but I just make note of things like that the stuff lines up. But just to get those two calendars to line up on the same day, it's a 293-year wait. Let's go to number 284 now. Now we're going to come back into the uniform Hebrew a little bit and mix it in for these examples. Of course, we notice right away that the Savior lived 33 years, and there's 33-year cycles here. So this shows in AD 41, on New Year, which was on both of the calendars. It had been 5 sets of these 293 years since crossing Jordan. And again, it's beginning its cycle. The martyrdom of James was in AD 44, and it was on Easter Sunday, which is on both perpetual Hebrew and uniform Enoch and uniform Hebrew. And so his martyrdom comes out when these calendars are all aligned, the 3 of them all aligned again. Again, I don't know, I can't put a lot of meaning on these things, but I try to just show examples of when things are happening. But the martyrdom of James was kind of a big thing, and I don't understand all of everything behind it. Let's go to the next slide, 285. Joseph's life shows also use of uniform calendars. Yeah, no, this one to me is more interesting. He's born on Easter on the perpetual Hebrew and on the regular Enoch, but he dies on Easter on the uniform Hebrew and the uniform Enoch. That to me, this is to me an interesting slide because it shows, you say, well, how are these calendars used by the Lord? And he's born on the real Easter Sunday on Hebrew and Enoch. And by the way, so's his wife 11 years later on both. The Hebrew calendar repeats after about 11 years, and 11 years after he's born, she's born. So when he's 30, when they get married, she's 19. But she's born right on the same day on both calendars again. But to have, very often we've seen before that the prophets, their births and their deaths are linked together, linked to their children, linked to their wives, but usually on the same calendar. This is an example where a double Easter is linked to a double Easter on the uniform versions. So this is partly me trying to figure out how is it God uses these things. And this to me is a classic example where you have more than one witness. If just one of them lined up, I could call it coincidence. But when two of them line up, then it's beyond it's two witnesses, and it's worth noting. It still could be a coincidence, but then you start to collect a whole bunch of these, and then it's not random anymore or that. Okay, let's go to 286. Now, I've had this picture up before, how Mary is tied to Rachel, Miriam, Leah, and Rebecca. And Mary ties to all of them with, she's like the hub of the wheel. She's the main woman in history. And these other women all link to her with at least a couple of holy days. This one is a slide where I've added a few more. These other calendars already shown are from the Venus calendar, the Enoch calendar, and the Sacred Round calendar, and the Mercury calendar, and we've been through all of those. The new spokes here are the uniform Hebrew. Virgin Mary and Leah and Rachel's birth and her death are tied to one Heshvan on the uniform Hebrew, and then one birth on the uniform Mercury. We didn't have that. These aren't down as uniform Mercury. So again, it's just showing lots and lots of links. And believe me, you can't fake these links. It's a big deal to be able to get, for instance, the one birth on the Venus calendar. That day only happens once in 1.6 years. One day. And to have that both on Rebecca's birth and Miriam's birth and Mary's birth, that's amazing in itself. If there were just a couple of spokes here, I think it's worth a picture. So anyway, I'm just saying these spokes just keep adding up, and I thought it was worth another slide. Let's go to 287. Now here's one where the symbolism ties in, because the uniform calendars can highlight related events. The fall of Eve. Now, the fall of Eve on the regular Hebrew calendar was on a decision day, and it's in the summer. And by the way, it was on a Sabbath day, as Denver pointed out at the last conference. It was on the Sabbath day. he said I was the only one that might worry about that, and I guess I do. That's been published on my site for years, that it was on a Saturday that was the fall of Eve. Well, it's a summer Saturday, which is a decision day, and yet it has everything to do with tabernacles, and because your body is your tabernacle, and it has to do with the fall. Well, it was the fall of Eve is on tabernacles on the uniform Hebrew, and the fall of Adam is on tabernacles on the uniform Enoch. Again, two witnesses on a meaningful day, just not a holy day, but the meaningful day. For instance, Adam is born on tabernacles. That's when he gets his tabernacle. So to have the fall of Adam on the day when his tabernacle is going to be set to become mortal. Anyway, they're meaningful holy days, and they're on these uniform calendars. But see, they're at a different time of year. Tabernacles is a fall feast, and they're partaking of it in the summertime. And so it's just great to be able to do a tabernacle thing in the summer, and that's what the uniform calendars are for. So that's what I'm trying to show. All righty, let's move on to 288. Enos, we've talked about before. His name means mortal, or man, but it's man in the sense of mortal. They have different words for man, but it represents, and morte is death. Mortality means you can die. So mortal is dieable, kind of a thing. And tabernacles has to do with becoming mortal. He was ordained to the priesthood on tabernacles. Again, we have tabernacles on uniform Enoch, and on end tabernacles, uniform Hebrew. So he's just Mr. Tabernacles and mortality on all of these different calendars. And the ordination dates are all given in section D&C 107. I think the new number is 171 or something like that. But anyway, and then I come down to exactly what day that was, and it's it's holy on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other calendars. So I mean, some of these days are just amazing. And the one thing all of these ordination dates have in mind, it was 1 prime on Venus. They were all holy days on the Venus calendar. That was the one thing they all have in common. Which was, there's always a pattern that you can find out how to distinguish just a day that happens to be holy on a lot of calendars, but distinguish out the proper one that you need. Okay. Also, well, let's not go into that. Let's move on to 289. We're back now. We've looked at the flood before when we went through the Jubilee calendar. So Noah dies on the Feast of Lights. This is the Feast of Dedication. This is the day that was not a holy day to the Hebrews until 165 BC at the rededication of the temple of when it was redone after the Seleucid Greeks had defiled it. It was rededicated. And then Jared, whose life is all about the flood, we've talked about that before. Born, died, everything had to do with baptism for him. He also died on lights. And again, one's perpetual Hebrew and one's regular Hebrew. But Jared is tied to the flood. Noah's tied to the flood. So I'm trying to give these different examples of how these calendars are used. Because with both of them on this lights holy day, it makes a tie between Jared and Noah. Whereas there hasn't been one. There's a zillion ties between Jared and his son Enoch. And but not, there hasn't been any other one to Noah, for instance, and yet they're both all tied to the flood. Okay, we're almost to time. Let's do one more slide, and we will stop for this week. 290, the day of the great deluge. Now this is important. It was not an important Hebrew day. They tell you the day of the flood in the Bible. It's the 17th day of what they used to call the second month in the fall, which is Heshvan. I count that as a minor holy day, but the Hebrews don't. There's no ceremonies for it. There's no anything, but there's just a lot of things that happen on that day, and I call it Deluge Day. But on these other calendars, it was a holy day. We went through the Jubilee calendar, and the day the rain started to fall was the day to start the watering, in the year of the watering, in the week of the watering, in the 360 years of the watering, and in the millennium of the watering. I mean, so on other calendars, it was a huge day, but this is just one more. On the Uniform Hebrew, it is the major holy day of Tabernacles. And again, it had a lot to do with tabernacles, which is again mortal, having to do with people's bodies, and this time it's their death and not their life. But okay, so that's just a lot of different kinds of uses of the Uniform Hebrew calendar. And we will start on slide 291 next week. So yeah, we're making progress here. All righty, I'm going to push the magic button on chat to see if there's some questions. I haven't had questions come in to my email as far as I know. I'm not seeing any on the chat. So I will listen for if anybody has some questions.
So yeah, hey, I have a quick one since we're on Uniform Hebrew. I forget how it aligns with the sacred round, because how many calendars do you have now that have been discovered? Is it 14 or 15? How many?
Yeah, it's 16 so far, and that's not counting the Jupiter and Saturn, which I know exist, but I haven't found yet.
And I remember at one point you stating that sacred round is the most important of any that you have studied.
Yeah.
And so with it,
I will answer your question. That is a great, thank you. That's a great question. The sacred round is based on, as you know, 13s. You count in tresenas, and you count by 13s. You also count by 20s, but let's just focus on the 13s, because the sacred round really is a grouping of days by 13s. And so it's 20 sets of 13s. Well, the Enoch fixed calendar has 4 quarters, and each quarter is 13 weeks of 7 days. 13 times 7 is the same as 7 times 13. And so you say, aha, that would be kind of cool if the Uniform Enoch calendar, which all the others are tied to. Uniform Hebrew is going to be tied to it, Uniform Star. So Uniform Enoch is like the master of the uniform calendars. Well, in fact, it is. They are set up so that when you have a day that's a 13 on the sacred round, and it's also on a Saturday, the Saturday 13 and then the Sunday number 1, those are the holy days on the Enoch calendar For instance, the equinoxes are all on a Saturday, number 13. They're all Saturday on the 13. And the first day of each quarter is on a Sunday that's on a day 1. So the point is they're synced together. The sacred round is tied. And that's why so often when some day is a holy day it's the equinox day, let's say on the Enoch calendar, it's going to be a holy day on the sacred round calendar. And now you've got Venus and Mars and Mercury. They all are synced to the Trisina. So all of the days, for instance, the baptism of Christ, all the baptisms, all of these holy days in the life of Christ are on either a day 1 or a day 13 on the sacred round. Well, if they're also on a Saturday, then they're also on holy days on the Enoch calendar. So that is how they mesh together. And I've never made a slide on that. That should be a slide somewhere. That is not in this show anywhere, because nobody else asked the question. So that's why I say you guys got to ask questions. It really helps. Okay, I got another question rolling in here from Gary. It says, why do I suppose that Joseph and Denver, weren't born on a 13 or a 1 on the sacred round, but instead of Joseph Smith is born on 9 Quake and Denver on 10? Well, because there's lots of different calendars. You don't have everybody born on a 13 or a 1. Yes, some of the main, especially the main prophets, where you can't know their birthday any other way. In other words, how are you going to know the birthday of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? It's got to be some way. And basically, most of them are, in fact, born on a 1. They're mostly on a 1. 13 is more like a death day, and 1 is more like a birthday. Very few are born on a day with 13. They're born on day 1. Now, Joseph Smith on day 9, when you look at the day he's born is not only 9 Quake, but I think it's 9 on the Venus calendar, something like 9 Birth or something, 9 something Venus, 9 something Mercury. There's a bunch of 9s straight across, and you say, aha, that's interesting. And Miriam dies on what we would call Good Friday, which is a day 6, and she dies on, it's a 6, 6, 6. It's like all the way across. It's Good Friday, and it's anyway. So she's not on a 1. She's born on 1 birth, but she dies on another day. But Denver's a good example of his birthday is on Passover on the uniform, on this very calendar. I wouldn't have said that if you weren't asking, but on the uniform Hebrew calendar. Remember I said you can have a Passover can happen anytime during the year. And Denver's, I can't remember now. Oh yeah, that's October 6th, I guess. So way up in October, and on our calendar, that's the day John the Baptist is born, which got to be interesting somehow. The Lord uses our calendar too, even though I don't count it in the sacred ones. It gets our attention all the time. A lot of things happen on April 6th, which are not necessarily on any other sacred calendar, but it gets our attention. But Denver is born on Passover, very much like ancient prophets were, but Passover on the uniform Hebrew calendar. I don't think I've published that anywhere. And I don't think I've got it on my, maybe he doesn't want me to say that. But anyway, so not everybody's on a 1 or a 13.
Could there be some significance, like you pointed out with Joseph, all the 9s, with that particular number and the particular symbol of the sacred round?
Probably. I haven't got it. I've never speculated on that. I've noted it in some paper that's interesting. It's 999, but I don't know what it means. And as far as if Denver, I haven't even looked his up, if he's on 10 Jaguar. All I can say is not everybody is a holy day on every calendar. And
sure.
It's more about what's meaningful.
Sure.
And it's a big deal just to have 2 or 3 holy days, really. So there's that question.
So the uniform Hebrew aligns on the Tresina, or however you pronounce it, the 13 and the 20. The alignments, it aligns on both the 13 and the 20?
No, not the 20 at all. The 20 just give you the different pictures, and it's not the uniform Hebrew, it's the uniform Enoch. The uniform Enoch, with its 4 quarters, aligns every quarter aligns with day 1 and the 13 for the Saturday and the Sunday.
Oh, okay, I get it.
See, because it's the 13 times 7 for the 364, and then the Hebrew is locked in, but only every 33 years. So it's not in an obvious way. For instance, it locks in on a Passover here, and it's 10 Jaguars. See, that's the fun of the variation. That's the whole fun of it. You get this variation, and yet it's in a nice, steady, every 33-year cycle. So yeah, the main one is the Enoch, and the main one on the stars. In fact, let me comment on the star thing, because I don't even have a slide on that. This was just discovered last month, and it was published late in April. But you have these star ages. You know there's this precession of the equinoxes, and the sun is in one constellation for a couple thousand years. Well, that constellation actually can be divided into weeks, because it turns out the constellation lengths are all in weeks. The stars are all, every constellation is a certain number of weeks long, for 52 weeks total for the year. And Cancer is only 2 weeks long, and Leo is 6, and Virgo 7. Well, those weeks, each one has a star, and instead of being for 2,000 years, which is like 4 weeks, a whole month, there's a star that rises with the sun for around 500 years. And it was a big mystery to me how that worked until last month. And so it's not going to be in this course anywhere, but it's so slick because it ties to the star calendar in the intercalation. When you put in the extra weeks, which you need for a 364-day calendar, it's tied to the Enoch calendar. And it considers the Enoch equinox day as the equinox day. And because of that, for 500 years, when you know what day the Enoch calendar, the regular Enoch, not the uniform, the regular Enoch calendar, which is around March 20th, every year there's on a Saturday near March 20th is the Enoch calendar equinox. The star rising on that day with the sun is exactly the same star for 500 years straight, or either 450 or 550, something like that, but for a whole era, because they're linked together. It is so clever. And it's like that star reigns for that time. And the star we're in now it took me a long time to get this name, but I believe the correct name for it is Revelation. We are in an age of revelation, which only started, I think it's like in 2001. And anyway, so that's just another example of the stars tying the interrelation between these different sacred calendars, where the star calendar is tied directly to the Enoch calendar. And that's new since I finished the course that we're going through.
So are the start days and the uniform start days, are they now correct on your site? Because I've noticed they've changed.
Yeah, they have changed.
Good.
The most recent one, just yesterday, whenever May 3rd was, I posted a new
I got your May 2nd.
Yeah, new dates for both Enoch and Star. And
great.
I just finished them like last week. So I will try to, when I send you guys copies of the code, I believe they're both correct now. The main thing I can say is I do not know that they're wrong. And until now, I have known that they were wrong. I knew they got an awful lot of right answers, but I could point to problems. I can't point to one problem now where I say, you know, this is wrong, but it still could be.
Sure.
But at least, so if you look at my computer code, it'll be the same exact computer code to intercalate the star calendar as it does the Enoch, except for every 500 years, then it rotates to a new star a week later, a week earlier. So anyway, let me comment on a comment I made last week. And I can be brief on this, but last week I did something I don't normally do, which was to announce a paper before it came out. And I said that on last Thursday that I had a paper ready that I had planned to publish, which would be in support of the recent sealed Book of Mormon that has come out. And in talking to a couple people, some in the class here that heard that and some others, had some concerns. I revisited parts of the paper and I noticed my article was not typical of my usual articles. It was very biased in favor of the book. I do believe the book is filled with a lot of light and truth, but it also copies a lot of our scriptures out of the Doctrine and Covenants that are filled with light and truth. So that is not a proof that it is all good. I was surprised at myself for having overlooked, when I read it, even twice in preparing for the paper, I saw problems in it. And I just overlooked them. And I'm used to doing that. It's like I'm all this forgiving guy and tolerant. And there's mistakes in the Bible. There's mistakes in the Book of Mormon. Not very many. Denver makes mistakes. Joseph Smith makes mistakes. People make mistakes. So when I see what I think is a mistake, I don't usually say, oh, well, I'm absolutely sure of my answer and that I must be right and they must be wrong. I tend to skip that and focus on the good. Well, the paper I had written focused only on the good. And I realized I had sort of done I had a blind spot where I just really didn't want to look at anything bad. So I revisited things and re-looked. And if you look at what paper did come out Thursday morning, it's a very short one that says, hey, we ought to look at everything with both eyes. Look with your right eye, look for the good. With your left eye, look for the evil. And we all have blind spots in both eyes, but when you look with both eyes, you don't have any blind spots. I actually have a picture right at the front of Snow White looking at the wonderful apple and just seeing good in the old woman offering it to her. And I say under it something like, look for the evil too. You know, I remember watching this as a kid. We're screaming in the audience, don't take it. You know, don't do that. We know something you don't here. And so I want to say to the group here, just because I have that picture does not mean I think the book is completely false and is a poisoned apple. And even though a lot of it's good, there's poison in it. it's really my way of saying I should have been more balanced in my approach. I still may write an article on it where I talk about both sides and how I deal with the different issues, or I may never do anything with it again. So just for you to know, that's what happened to the article I thought I was going to last week. And I'd like to thank those in the class that did contact me and on both sides of the issue, actually. And it just helped me to be more balanced in my approach. Oh, and let me add this. The biggest problems when I was 14 years old and first read the Book of Mormon, I picked out a list of obviously bunk stuff in it that surely this could not be true. The stuff I picked out as the worst at age 14 with my infinite wisdom of a teenager turned out to be some of the best proofs that it's true. And the example I'll give, and then we're done, is I don't know if you even know the name Cecil B. DeMille, but he did the big movies like, The Exodus, the Ten Commandments, and big dramatic movie producer. And when I read the part that the Nephites who believed in the sign of the birth of Christ being light all night, that the Lord said, hey, lucky you, the very night before you're all going to be killed, guess what? The sign's going to be given and it's going to be pretty cool and dramatic and, big deal. Well, that just seemed like too much of a coincidence to me at age 14. I said, no, that's never going to happen. That's Cecil B. DeMille, Hollywood, clearly bogus. Later on, I learned that they're both tied to Passover. When you look at Samuel's prophecy and how there was an argument over when it could be fulfilled, the latest possible date for Samuel's argument to be fulfilled would have been right at Passover. And Christ is born right at Passover. So it's not a coincidence. They're both linked by a holy day on a sacred calendar. So I'm just saying, just because I see problems, sometimes they turn out to be the best thing. But right now, I do see problems. So with that in mind, we're over time, and we'll start here next week. Hello? Is the class over? Did I?
Oh, I'm sorry. No. I had it on mute. He said, let's conclude then. Thanks, John, as always, and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Till then.
All right. Hey, thanks.
You bet. Right. Bye-bye.